Wuthering Waves is well into version 2 right now, releasing a ton of new characters to expand more on the roster. After experiencing a large expansion to the game's content in 2.0, they've since been working to innovate just about every aspect of the game, from quality of life adjustments to new characters to new enemies to new game modes, and whatever else you can find in the kitchen sink. It's been very refreshing to see how things have developed over the past couple months. One area in particular that I think has been built on more subtly though is the growing variety in character playstyles. Back in my video on WuWa's team building, I posited how the game needs more things to it that incentivize a more strategic approach to conceptualizing your party, and it was my hope that version 2 would accomplish that as we got more characters. Happy to say they delivered on all that and then some. More interestingly, the recent characters have brought with them not only very colorful playstyles, but some noteworthy aspects to them that could evolve the WuWa metagame. Today I want to make a discussion on the direction Kuroro is taking with its units, and how I feel like they'll unfold throughout the rest of version 2, and perhaps finalized in version 3. Like with any gacha game, the first year or so is often characterized as a Wild West period. Players are focused on learning the game's systems, figuring out how to optimize the various mechanics to the best of their ability, and of course waiting for new units to come out. Surprisingly, unlike other titles who push units out aggressively at the start before dialing it back a bit, Kuroro took a more conservative approach, limiting the amount of units we had throughout version 1. Not just that, but version 1 lasted only half a year, which I definitely should have acknowledged in defense of them. Kind of hard to make a bunch of teams when there aren't that many units to go around to begin with. In light of there being hardly anything for WuWa's characters to build on, most of them were designed to be self-contained, that is, they can exercise the full extent of their capability regardless of their team. When you take a look at Jian, Changli, Shangli, and Camellia, while they do have inherent synergies with a couple characters, you can also just play them as they are, which is the point. It would be imprudent for Kuroro to make feature 5 stars with hyper-specific niches from the get-go due to the fact that no one would be able to use them. Even supports and secondaries like Yinlin, Zhezhi, and Shorekeeper were intended for general use first and unique synergy second. Come version 2, characters are being brought in with the roles reversed, unique synergy first. They can begin to play into specific niches and perform better than their general counterparts in exchange for being restricted to only that. Further, existing characters with the niche could also realize more of their potential as we begin to round out the missing parts. When Carlotta came out, she was a general DPS for all intents and purposes, but her inclusion paired with Zhezhi meant that 2 glacial damage dealers were now in the game, giving Baitu the opportunity to actually be on par with Verena courtesy of the glacial damage boost on her S6. A side grade, but it frees up Verena to be used on other teams. Previously, Baitu was completely outclassed by her 5-star counterparts due to her general stat line and buffing profile being much lower, but thanks to Carlotta, Baitu is now a worthwhile option for arguably the best boss killing team in the current metagame. Then came Roccia, who, candidly speaking, wasn't a very strong character as we knew her. She was only marginally stronger than Danshin and Sanhua at the time, and that was assuming you got her signature weapon to go along with it. This led to many dismissing her as not worth having. But then shortly after, they released a new wave clear-centric game mode, Wuthering Waves, where you can make a case for her being the strongest secondary character thanks to her decent personal damage, party-wide attack boost, and unparalleled damage buff. Roccia would be the first truly niche character, and conveniently for her, they brought her niche in real quick. A strong Havoc secondary for Camellia and Rover, as well as a best in slot for Wuthering Wastes. The next character would be Phoebe, who had 2 versions of her, a DPS and a support route. Regardless of the mode you elect to play, Phoebe expanded more on the Spectral Frazzle mechanic. Meanwhile, Spectral Rover was retroactively given that property, allowing both units to access the Eternal Radiance set. Despite being an extremely powerful boss killer, there's still a lot more to improve on with the character, in that Phoebe can be an amazing secondary for a triple Spectral Frazzle team, assuming we do get a new Spectral Frazzle-oriented DPS. Just like Carlotta, the presence of Phoebe represents an indirect buff for Spectral Rover, who was low-key falling off throughout version 1. Following Phoebe, we got Brant, a most unusual individual, but one that offered a respectable anchor, no pun intended, both for TOA and Whimpering, making him a great choice for units like Changli, Encore, or even himself as a damage dealer. Not the most sought after unit overall, but he finally gave Changli and Encore a better secondary than each other for their respective teams. Although even then, you can argue they still could use a more fitting secondary. The point is, Brant's fleshing out the roster in a more team-oriented manner. Not only that, but he's the first attacker who can also heal and shield the team. By no means is he a suitable replacement for Verena or Shorekeeper, but it does alleviate the consistency of teams involving him by adding a bit more burst protection and sustain, considering Shurina are more regen healers, which may not be enough on its own. Then most recently came Mistress Cantarella, another Havoc secondary unit, but one that takes on a more damage-oriented role and a ton of party flexibility. She's not the best support for any of her teams at the moment, which is kind of the main issue with her, in that she's waiting for someone who can use her outro skill to the fullest, but she's an excellent substitute for teams evolving Tutu. Then of course, Tension, Havoc Rover, and Camellia would very much enjoy a Midnight Veil support. If you're feeling up to it, you can even attempt to use Cantarella alongside Roccia for a triple Havoc team. She's just a solid character overall, and one of the most playstyle diverse in the game. And of course, being a new version and all, Rover finally got their newest element, Arrow. I'm sure enough discussion has been brewing about the character and how they turned out surprisingly disappointing, but there's more to it than that. Rover brings with them a new debuff reminiscent of Spectral Frazzle called Arrow Erosion, which I'll just be calling Erosion for the heck of it. Few things, obviously this is far from their true potential. Much like Havoc Rover before, we need to wait for them to get their hands on the rest of their sequences, more refinements of their signature weapon, and last but certainly not least, a proper teammate who also interfaces with the Erosion. This marks the second time they've implemented an element-specific property after Spectral Frazzle. But even though it's nice to see elements having a more distinct identity from each other, a possible double-edged sword is that mono-element teams can get screwed over pretty badly during cycles of Tower and Whimpering that reduce damage of a specific element. As a result, we get more variety in team compositions, but they become more situational. Now that we've briefly gone over all of version 2's characters so far, 3 notable things come to mind, the first being a huge focus on the character and their roles. Categorically speaking, WuWa's biggest archetype is the hybrid role, possessing characters who can do multiple things, from dealing damage to healing and shielding to buffing, debuffing, and so on. Brant, Cantarella, Phoebe, and Roccia all having the ability to deal damage and provide a measure of utility ensures they'll be serviceable for a long time to come, especially with how close Kuro is keeping the balance between units. That's one aspect of the game that merits praise. They really think their characters through. Apart from the starting cast, I don't think there's a single unit who's horrendously designed, at least not from the pool of 5 stars. Maybe we can complain about Lumi. I was also worried we'd be running into situations where one character ends up hogging all of the spotlight away from members of other categories, but from the looks of it, they seem to be doing just fine with that. We have 2 Havoc secondaries in the form of Cantarella and Roccia, 2 Spectral main attackers, Jinxi and Phoebe, 2 Havoc attackers in Camellia and Havoc Rover, 2 Fusion attackers in Brant and Cantarella, 2 Spectral healers in Shorekeeper and Verena. Yet each of them have enough differences to be distinct from one another while not necessarily competing against each other. It's not like Genshin where everything is compared to within the realm of Spiral Abyss. Camellia may not be the best hologram and tower killer, but she sure as hell beats the shit out of almost everyone in Whimpering. Second thing is, they're creating tangible differences between its elements beyond type coverage. Spectral has Frazzle while Arrow has Erosion. I can very easily see it going in that direction for subsequent characters too. Granted, they'll have to make more dedicated healers than just Sharina, but the presence of elemental debuffs has me believing we're going to see more elemental synergies too. The 2.1 livestream announced we'd be getting new elemental specific debuffs in the future as well, which is something to look forward to. An extra benefit of this is that it doesn't cause much of an imbalance between characters, if at all. Arrow, Fusion, Glacial, Havoc, you don't have one element standing head and shoulders above all the others. Not for now anyway. Good thing too, elements are giving distinctions but not being too distinct to where it's detrimental towards the relevance of other elements. Rover seems to be ground zero for this too, considering Spectral Rover and Air Rover are the basis for their respective debuffs. Havoc Rover's the main DPS, so I don't think they're intending to give every single element a debuff yet, but the support versions of Rover certainly feel like it, which can also mean their goal is to keep every element of Rover viable to some extent. I mean, I'm sure as hell not complaining, especially after a certain other MC we've been waiting 5 years for. On that front, I think they're spending a great deal of effort to focus on the feel of a character as much as they're trying to make them feel unique to play. In other gachas, I seldom care about playstyle, I just play whatever is most optimal, usually because they don't put that much emphasis on mechanics or rotation fluidity. WuWa is very much the opposite. Because so much importance is placed on mechanical execution, the way a character feels to play from one person to another makes even more of a difference in how they're received. Cantarella plays so different from Roccia, Jinxi plays so different from Phoebe. Brant has the most whack-ass gameplay. Even if the characters are in similar roles, they play so differently that some players will be partial to these characters or some characters will want others. More so if you take into account quick swapping making certain units more compatible with others. They're really navigating the release of new characters in a methodical fashion. Like back in 1.4, I felt like the game didn't have much to really expand on in its current state, and then so far throughout version 2 they've been adding new playstyles, innovating new attack formats, adding just the right amount of gameplay elements to keep things fresh without feature creeping the game, as well as adding just the right kinds of content to give the roster enough creative latitude for characters to not overlap with each other. The only exception being Calculator and Shanli Yao, but that's only because they're literally the same. A good part of that might have to do with Kuro making sure every part of a character's kit does something. We don't see many one-button characters. Everyone's doing their auto attacks, everyone's using their skills, everyone's using every part of their kit. Even if the premise of the character is very simple, the inclusion of Forte Circuit, intro and outro skills, swap cancelling and whatnot makes every unit have a comprehensive experience. At a surface glance, there's no major distinction between elements, nor is there any kind of division of classes, but the circumstances by which you put the characters through give just about everyone the opportunity to excel in their own way, whether fighting bosses, taking out lots of enemies, going for ease of use, or testing your mechanics. So if we were to evaluate everything collectively, my theory is that for the remainder of version 2 and then continuing on into version 3, there will be a major focus on personal expression in combinations. At the start of WuWa, I think many players were trying to use Genshin Impact as a reference point on how units are meant to be graded based on attributes, performance, and power. I'm sure a more appropriate comparison would have been PGR, but it's easy to notice those kinds of similarities when the overwhelming majority of interested parties came from one of the Hoyo games. But as WuWa continued to develop, it became clear that in addition to combining systems or mechanics together, that being attribute increases, the new elemental debuffs, and so on, there's an equal if not greater focus on attack style, which I don't think I've really seen in a gacha game before. Combining units that may not appear to have direct synergy with each other, but can weave into each other's playstyles indirectly to be more flexible or rewarding to play. It creates a whole new dynamic to party composition that actively rewards player input and creativity, not simply adding numbers together in a spreadsheet. For example, in almost every character guide or review, there's always a mention of a straightforward team and then a skill issue team, typically involving some semblance of quick swapping. Multiple units, when paired together, can achieve a slightly higher result than what would otherwise be their conventional team if you play them a certain way. The game gives you that option. When looking at someone like Brant, you might not think he's the most impressive unit out there. His personal DPS falls short of the top brass like Carlotta and Phoebe, and he has a fair bit of field time when you account for his overly flamboyant attack animations. However, when taking into consideration that he spends most if not all of his time in the air, Brant's able to basically ignore most attacks due to being too high for enemies to hit. If you were to combine this with another attacker capable of aerial combat like Chanli, you can outright cheese a lot of fights by ignoring their attack patterns altogether. This could resonate with players. Another possible strategy would be to spam characters who have ways to stagger opponents, a good case study being Carlotta and Cantarella. Normally, if you were to look at just attributes, Jojo seems like the clear favorite, and to most situations that's true. But there are moments where Cantarella could be especially helpful in dealing with bosses. Both Carlotta and Cantarella have slowdown or freeze effects, reducing the pressure of bosses for more comfy play. Seeing as higher level holograms have scaling that can literally one-shot you, people might value the slowdown effects more than conventional DPS. Playstyle preference carries measurably greater influence in this game. It's more than just what feels good to play. Choosing the right playstyle for you literally determines if you pass or fail the content. Some people might not be good at playing teams with long specific rotations that need to be followed to maximize DPS, even if that team is the best team in the game, because it's just not comfortable for them. Bottom line is, WuWa's character design focuses more on what the characters can bring to the table. It's about individual focus over collective. So much emphasis is being placed on how a character feels to play and not just what a character has, that you can theoretically make an argument for any of them to be best in slot depending on the situation. Sure, there's going to be an element of direct competition with each other. Shorekeeper by this point has convincingly won the debate on who is better between her and Verena, but even then, Verena has opportunities to outshine her counterpart even if in a small way, such as taking virtually zero field time to do anything. It's even more noticeable in the DPS category. There isn't one character beating everyone else like we see in other games. The presence of Hologram being a 1v1 boss battle, Whimpering Wastes being a wave battle, and Tower being somewhere in the middle makes it close to impossible for a DPS character to be good at all of them. At best, they could be above average, but for them to truly excel at one field, they have to yield in another, making the game a lot more diverse than it looked back in version 1. I'm really looking forward to how they plan to expand on this. I think a big contributor to the success of its units comes from the game having actual endgame variety, not just a single place forcing all units to compete against each other over. Perhaps in the future they might try to add more stuff like a survival game mode, making units like Brant and Cantarella more appealing since they can also heal. But anyway, what do you guys think about the future of WuWa's characters? Do you like where this is going, or do you find this direction to be a problem? Let me know in the comments down below. Once again, I do apologize for how I sound in this video. I'll try my best to recover quickly, but if you enjoyed the video in spite of that, I would appreciate it if you left a like and subscribed. Don't forget to follow me on Twitter at Vars, join my Discord server, and check out my other Wuthering Waves discussion videos if you haven't yet. But till next time, thanks so much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon. Take care.